When it comes to interpreting the Old Testament or any ancient text, it's very important for us to try to understand the conceptual world of the writer and the audience. So in this case, we need to go back thousands of years and examine the conceptual world of the ancient Near East. And to do this, I highly recommend John Walton's book, Ancient Near Eastern Thought and the Old Testament. I'm going to give you just some excerpts from that book, some bullet points to help us to get inside the head of the writer and the readers of the Old Testament. First, Walton points out that there's no such word as religion in the languages of the ancient Near East. Likewise, there's no dichotomy between secular and sacred, or between natural and supernatural. These things are very natural to us. We think of religious and secular. We think of natural and supernatural. For example, if someone gets sick, we think, well, there must be a virus or an infection, or there's a cause for that we can identify and then remedy. In the ancient world, if someone got sick, it was because they had sinned. They had done something to offend the gods. They had violated moral law, and so they were being punished by sickness. This was true even in the New Testament. Jesus is asked about a man who was born blind, and he says, and they asked him, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? You see the assumption that's there? They didn't say, well, was this a genetic component here? Of course not. That wasn't even on their radar. So that's important for us to understand when it comes to interpreting particularly the descriptions of sin and suffering in the Old Testament, that the psalmist would have looked to divine causes for those and not elsewhere. Likewise, Walton says, all experience was religious experience and all law was spiritual in nature. All duties were duties to gods and all events had deity as their cause. So it's a completely integrated worldview where the gods were active in human affairs, active in events that happened on the planet, storms and volcanoes and earthquakes. You might remember Psalm 18, where God, Yahweh, does all of these things. It's described as a fire coming out of his mouth. When he spoke, it was the thunder. He scattered arrows, his arrows of lightning. So everything physically in the cosmos had deity as their ultimate cause. Theogony, that is the origin of the gods. Now, the gods in the ancient Near East could all be traced back to one primordial, singular, inactive, divine deity. So kind of a mysterious deity, kind of unknown, existed at all times, so infinite. The gods existed in familial relationships, so husbands and wives, fathers, sons, mothers and daughters, all these normal family relationships that we experience in human society. And they're portrayed in generations, and they usually come into existence through procreation. That is, male and female have a baby. So that's how they come into existence. Not just, boom, they exist, but they come into existence the way that humans come into existence, so to speak. In contrast to that, Yahweh has no origin story. His name is I Am, the ever-existing one. I have always been. There's never been a time when I did not exist. There is no origin story, and there are no other gods that he brings into existence. He is not the father of gods. He is God, he alone, the I Am. Gods were anthropomorphic. By that we mean they had human form. They were envisioned as being like us, same body parts, facial features, same activities. How else could we conceive of them if not in human form? So what follows then is they had the same qualities as humans, but without the limitations. So think of them like superheroes. Superman looks just like a normal human being, but obviously he doesn't have the limitations. He can fly and he has superpowers and things like that. Of course, he still has some limitations, and he's also not morally perfect. So keep that in mind. Divine features, they were also geographically or geopolitically based. So they were located near their temple. Now, they could operate in other parts of the cosmos, but but they did have this geographical center where they could be worshiped, that's what temples were for. They were for the gods to come down to the earth and interact with humans. So they were always tied to geography. They're also tied to particular phenomena in the cosmos. So they're cosmically bound. So they had jobs to do, like Baal was the god of the storm, of rain and thunder and lightning. Ra, the Egyptian god, was the god of the sun, and he rode across the sky in his boat. So they had jobs to do to take care of certain aspects of the world and the environment. They were procreative, meaning they were sexually active, and they got together with other gods and had children, and sometimes got together with humans and had children. They were fallible. They were human in that sense, very, very human-like. And they were emotional, which in the Psalms, God, of course, is portrayed as emotional. His anger, his delight are both portrayed in the Psalms. But what you won't find about God is shame or fear. These were emotions that God doesn't experience, but the ancient gods did. Shame and fear, just like humans. They were engaged in daily routines and activities. In other words, they had jobs to do. They ate. They slept. They did their thing on the planet, and they lived in community. And the psalmist will occasionally speak of the council of the gods. Psalm 82, a classic example of that. So they lived in community. They talked to one another and made decisions together, consulted one another. So in other words, as you look at this, you see that all of the things about the gods mirrored human society and human government and social structures. When it comes to justice, the gods were also often called out to, prayed to, obviously, by the people who were wanting justice and wanting answers. But generally, the gods were not very forthcoming and often incompetent when it comes to executing judgment, although they did impose judgment. So anytime there was a famine or earthquake or storm or disaster or plague, these were seen as divine judgment. The gods are also known for being wise, but not necessarily in the moral or ethical sense of wisdom, just more as a source of information. They have insider information, essentially. And so the priest would use processes of divination to determine that information, like to know when is a good time to plant or harvest, or is there a plague coming, a famine coming. They wanted to know the future so that it gave them power, that the humans wanted this information, right? Because it gives them power. And so they had various ways of divining that. Interestingly, it's rare for a god to be described as good. That's significant because Yahweh is described as good all the time. His steadfast love endures forever, his faithfulness. He is a good God. That's very clear. Although worshipers hoped for the gods to do good on their behalf, they weren't really appealing to the goodness of the God himself to do that. Faithfulness is another word that's never used of the gods, yet it's one of the most frequently used words to describe Yahweh, his dependability, his constancy, his trustworthiness, his truthfulness. Mercy and compassion were often sought after from the gods, but again, that's not their essential nature. Likewise, the word holiness was not used of gods. Holiness is used to refer to cult objects that were dedicated for use in the temple, but not to the gods themselves. But again, Yahweh is described as merciful, compassionate, and of course, absolutely holy. So keep those things in mind as you read the text of the Psalms and of the Old Testament, that this was the mindset of the ancient world. And so Yahweh is going to set himself apart as different from this in many ways, but understand that the peoples and the cultures around Israel embraced these ideas about the gods.